In this video, we'll walk you through an entire Excel data project that will start off with some raw data and end up with a complete interactive dashboard. During the video, we'll clean our data, connect some lists, and in the end, you'll walk away with something that looks like this. So if you want to get into data analysis, looking to get a job that uses Excel, or even looking to add a simple example to your portfolio of work, better yet, take this example and build on it. So in this video, I've decided to do something a little different and not script out the entire video. Rather present this as an official training class so it's more organic, real life, and you can see how things work in real time. Who knows, we may even encounter some hiccups along the way, so let's see what we get. Okay, everybody, let's officially kick off this Excel data project. So this Excel project is going to have roughly 3 phases. The first phase will be getting to know and walking through our lists. The second phase will be connecting our lists into PowerPivot, and the third phase will be building our pivot tables along with the dashboard itself. So let's kick off phase 1 by getting to know our data and getting it prepped for use. So usually what I like to do is whenever I work with a list, I always like to make a copy or a backup copy of the list. Why? Let's say something goes wrong, things really fall out of bed and things just go off the rails. It's a good idea to have the original to fall back on just to save yourself some aggravation. So to kick things off, what I'm going to do is go down here and I'm going to copy these sheets. Now, granted, there are several ways to do this, but what I'll do is I'll click on my order sheet, do a control click and drag and move that over here. And then I'll do the same thing with the customers. Let's click and drag that over there. Okay. So then normally what I like to do is rename it to something like work followed by the sheet name. So in this case, I'll just do a rename, and to keep it simple, I'll call this W for work followed by orders. And then we'll do a rinse and repeat over here with the customers. Okay. There we go. Okay. So now at this point, it's really your discretion. Normally what I like to do is hide the sheets that are the originals just so I don't touch them excuse me, I can't speak. What I'll do is I'll hide them because I don't like to inadvertently touch them. So I'll do a right click and let's go with hide there. And let's do a right click and hide there. Okay, now that we've hidden our sheets, why don't we take a second and walk through the data just so you can get familiar with it. And yes, you can download a copy if you wish. You'll find it in the description below. So anyhow, here's what we got. In this example, you want to pretend that you're going to be working with a fictitious dog food company. Yeah, I'm a big dog fan. So we have 2 sheets we're working with, our orders and our customers. If we start off with our order sheet, just to begin, every line item you see here happens to be an order that somebody placed at some point in time. And again, not going to waste time. You can scroll through this as you wish. The data that they keep track of happen to be the order ID, the product category, and the subcategory. Nothing too crazy right there. You have the geographic region, a state, the customer source. What's that? That is how that person found us. So let's pretend they came in through, let's say, Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever. Order date, ship date. I can't complicate that. Shipping method, what's that? That is how that product got shipped out, be it standard, FedEx, whatever. And then you have some numbers right here. And again, these are just made up. So the idea behind the expense is this is how much it costs us to process this order. Quantity sold, can't complicate that. Unit price, very straightforward. The sales happens to be the quantity times the price, and the profit happens to be the sales minus expenses. And then you have your customer ID over here, which you will see how that comes into play somewhere down the road. If I jump over here to the customers sheet, you'll notice that we have some demographic data. Again, nothing too crazy. We have the person's first name and last name. We have their address, city and state, their ownership status. Do they rent or own their property? You have your urban and your rural areas, which is city and non-city, as you know, the person's income, and then the device that they use to shop with us. So did they use a PC, phone, tablet, etc., etc.? Okay, now that we walked through our data, let's go back and get this stuff prepped for use. So I'm going to go back here to my order sheet. Now, whenever you work with a list, it's a really good idea to take your column headings and make them bold. The reason behind that is twofold. Number one, you're building in some aesthetics. It helps the person delineate the column headings versus the body of the list. Number two, really what you're doing behind the scenes is you're building in functionality. So put another way, when you take these column headings and you make them bold, you're actually telling Excel that these are the fields of your list. And you'll see where fields come into play down the road. So column heading or column label equals fields. So I'll go over here to my customers and I'll do the same thing with that. So select that, make that bold. Okay, cool. Requisite number 1 complete. Let's move on and talk about cleaning up our data. Now, whenever you clean data with lists, it can get very involved and very intense. And pardon the cheap plug, I do have a video down below that you can watch that is dedicated to how you clean data in Excel if you want to watch that. But for today's purposes, let's focus on the more common stuff you're going to encounter, which is you'll have duplicate data, you'll have some blanks, and potentially some formatting issues. So let's start off by talking about, do we have any duplicates? So duplicates can really screw you up, and you want to get rid of those in your list. So for today, let's check this list. So what we'll do is we'll click inside the body of the list, and then we'll go up and click on the Data tab, cruise over to where it says Remove Duplicates. I should have highlighted my list, but I didn't think about that, so that's fine. So let's see here what we got. I'll click OK. No duplicates found. Awesome. Click OK. And now let's jump over to the worksheet, the customer sheet, and let's do a rinse and repeat here. So I'll select this list for today. It's not that big. Do it the long way here. Okay, that'll work. And let's go over here and click on Data, Remove Duplicates, select all, click OK. Ah, look at that. 15 duplicates were found. Cool. So I'll click OK here. Moving on, let's talk about blanks. Now, blanks can really trip you up. Generally speaking, with your list, you do not want any blank rows or blank columns. That is a huge no-no. Blank cells, you can get away with it, but that said, it's usually not a good idea. So as you can see in our home ownership column, we do have some blanks. So let's go ahead and fill those in. So I'm going to cruise up here and click on the Home tab. Let's go over here to Find and Select. I'll choose Find. Actually, let me close that first. Let me select this column just to make sure I have everything. Don't want Excel to get wonky on me. There we go. Confine it. Now let's do that again. And I'll say replace that with, let's go with undisclosed. Go. Click on, let's go replace all. Okay, so it looks like we had 5 replacements done. So click OK. Close that out, and we are good there. Okay. So that step is complete. Now let's move on. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about this income column. So there are times when you work with a range of numbers, and really what you want to do is lump them together or group them or put them in brackets. The reason behind it is when you display a whole bunch of numbers on a chart or a pivot table, it can really look ugly and it can really work against you. So putting them in groups or brackets can really help out. So some use cases would probably include, obviously, the income, of which we'll talk about today, the person's years of service, how old a person is, let's say how long have they been a customer, etc. So what we're going to do is let's go over here to column J, right click and insert, and let's just call this, let's go with tier. Now I'll go with tier today. That brings me to a good point. Whenever you use column names or field headings, it's a very good idea to make them descriptive in nature. So when the person reads them, they'll understand what's going on. For today, tier will work just fine. And let's say we want to put these people in, this sounds demeaning, I don't mean it to yet for illustration purposes. Let's say we want to put the person into a low, middle, or high income bracket. Now, granted, there are a few ways to do this, but for today, while we use our good friend, the ifs function, because it'll make our life really easy. And let's just say that if the person makes $40,000 or lower, they're in the lower income bracket, between 95, let's say between 40, roughly 40 and 95, that'll put them in the middle income bracket, and anything over $95,000 will put them in the high income bracket. So let's cruise over here and click on our FX icon. And we can do a search for the ifs, click go. And yes, I know it's there. I'm just showing you what to do. And I'll then click OK. And let's see here. Let's build our logical test. So what is a logical test? That translates to question. So what is the question? Well, we'll cruise over here and click on cell I2, and we'll ask Excel. We'll say, hey, Excel, is I2 less than 40,000? I'll click where it says value if true. That means what happens if the answer is yes. If it's true, we'll classify the person as low. Oof, sounds rough. Next, let's say if their income is less than or equal to, say, 95,000, I'll put them in the middle category. And then let's say if this is greater than 95,000, tab that, that'll put them in the high. Okay. Let's click OK. Let's see what we get. Okay. Oh boy, misspelled middle. So let me go up and fix that real quick. Yes, typing is not my strength. You can make fun of me all you want. Please feel free. I'm totally cool with that. Click OK. There we go. All right. So now let's do a double click and cruise down, take a quick look at our data. Seems like it's pretty accurate. Okay, that part is done. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up phase one. Again, just to do a quick recap, whenever you work with your list, it's a good idea to create backups of them. Some people prefer to do a save as and different file. That'll work, but it depends your point of view. Personally, I like to take everything and make it self-contained. So copy your sheets, rename it to something practical, designating it as a worksheet or whatever. Hide the ones you don't want. Clean your data, which again is rough. Once your data is cleaned, you're ready for phase two, and let's move on to that. Okay, so next thing we'll talk about is how to connect our lists, which is something that you are most likely going to encounter in real life. Why? It's becoming a growing trend. A lot of people are working with larger data sets nowadays. They're working with multiple lists. So put another way, you're going to have to know how to do this at some point. And frankly, a lot of people do not know how to connect lists. So let's get into it. So whenever you work with a list and you want to connect them, you need to have a common thread or a common field between them. Why? Because that common field will actually act like a bridge. And when you connect the two lists, you'll be able to extract information from them. So let's take a look at our data here and let's see if we can identify a common thread. Well, if we study it, nothing too crazy is going on or nothing sticks out until we see this customer ID. That's kind of suspect. What's going on there? So if we go over to, let's say, our customer list, you notice we have this customer ID over here. So since we have a customer ID on our customers list and a customer ID on our orders list, we can actually connect those two lists, of which we're going to do here in PowerPivot in a few moments. Okay, so to connect your list, you want to make sure that PowerPivot has been enabled, and you can see it up here on my screen. If PowerPivot has not been enabled, what you want to do is the following. You want to click on File, Options, and then over here where it says Add-ins, cruise down to where it says Manage, click the drop arrow, choose Comms, or Com Add-in, click Go, and then check the PowerPivot for Excel, click OK, and enable it, and you'll see it up here. So whenever you work with PowerPivot, you kind of have to prime the pump a little bit, which means you want to convert your lists into official Excel tables. The reason for that is it just makes everything easier. So let's convert these lists to a table, and then we'll jump into PowerPivot. So I'm going to go over here and click inside the body of the orders list, and then cruise up and click on Insert Table. I'll then click OK. Oof, this always hurts my eyes. So I don't like leaving tables in this format. It just bugs me. Sorry. So after I convert it to a table, I'm going to go up here and click on my drop arrow and switch it to this kind of no format style because it's just easier and doesn't give me eye strain. And then whenever you create your table, it's always a good idea to rename the table to something practical. So I'm going to cruise up here into the upper left-hand corner. I'll change this to say something like orders. That'll work. Press enter. Okay. And now let's do a rinse and repeat with our customers. So we'll jump over here, click inside the table, or list/table, same thing, pretty much. So click inside the body of the list, insert table, click OK. Ugh, painful. There we go. And let's give this a ridiculously original name like customers. Okay, so now that we've created our tables, the next step is to put these tables into PowerPivot. So in the event you're unfamiliar with PowerPivot, really what PowerPivot is, it's just a add-in that you can really do some high-end fancy data modeling, analysis, all that pretty cool stuff. It does get pretty deep pretty quick, so do not be intimidated when you learn it. For today, what we're going to do is just use PowerPivot to connect our tables. How do we put our tables inside of PowerPivot? I'm on the customer sheet, so it doesn't really matter where we start. I'll click up here and click on PowerPivot. I'm sorry, click inside the body of the list, excuse me. Click on PowerPivot, and then we'll cruise over here and click on Add to Data Model. So I click on that, just give PowerPivot a couple seconds to work its magic, and you will see the data has been imported into PowerPivot. I can see all the lists. I can see all the line items from the list, and we see the table down there as well, so that's good. And now I'll go up here and minimize that. And let's do a rinse and repeat for the orders. So click over here and click on Add to Data Model. Give it a couple seconds. There we go. Nice. Cooperating. It's always a plus. Okay, so now that our tables have been added into PowerPivot, the next step is to connect them. So the way you do that is you cruise up here and you click on the diagram view. And let's kind of resize this a little bit. I'll move this over here, resize that. Oops, resize that. There we go. Move that over here. So to connect your tables, what you want to do is you want to hover over the customer ID field on the one table, in this case, the customers, and drag it over to the customer ID on the orders table. When you let go, Excel will wave its magic wand and you'll see this 1, 2, and then you'll see this asterisk right here. Really what this is, it's called a table relationship. And there are really 3 types of relationships you can encounter, something called one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many. That's a whole separate thing. For right now, going to be working with a one-to-many relationship. What's that? What that means is one row or one record on one table talks to many rows or many records on another table. So put in plain English, what we're really saying here is one customer can have many orders. If you think about it, that's logical. So that works. Okay. So we've got our little relationship created, and now what we can do is create our pivot table. But before we do that, please indulge with me for 1 second while I kind of give you like a brief commentary as to what's going on. This whole thing of having a common field between the tables and connecting them to create relationships is really teetering on a concept called database normalization, which is just really fancy geek speak for the process that you use to design a database. And frankly, if I can be so bold, I highly encourage you to learn a lot about that. The reason is the concepts you'll learn with database design are applicable all across the board, meaning you'll use them in Excel, PowerPivot, Power BI, Tableau, database applications like Access, and your SQLs and your Oracles of the world. So put another way, when you learn database normalization, you really build a strong foundation, and you'll be amazed on how much you draw on it throughout your career. So that said, you have your homework assignment. Okay, so from here, our next step is to start building our pivot tables, and there are a few ways to do that. For example, you can go up here and click on pivot table again to insert one, or you can close out and go back to Excel, of which I'm going to do. Why? I don't know, just kind of what I'm in the mood to do. So I'm gonna cruise up here and I'm gonna click on the save icon just to put my conscience at ease, something I like to do. And then I'll close out. It should bring me back to Excel, which is good. And now the next step is to start building our pivot tables. Okay, so before we move on to this next phase, let's take a second and define what a pivot table is, just in the event you're unfamiliar with it. So whenever you work with a pivot table, you want to think you're going to create a fancy display or a layout of your data. You're simply going to create an arrangement. That's all they really are. Granted, pivot tables can get pretty intense, but overall, they're not too bad. There's plenty of tutorials out there online you can watch. All right, so now let's start building a couple of them. Okay, let's kick things off by adding in 2 sheets. So let's cruise down here and add in our first sheet. And how about we call that pivot tables, because that's where we are going to build everything. And then we'll add in another sheet, and let's go ahead and call that one dashboard, because that is where we're going to collect all of our charts and tie everything together. So I'll move this one over here. Move that one over there. Okay, go to the pivot table sheet. Cool. So to add your first pivot table, what you want to do is cruise up and click where it says Insert, Pivot Table, and you want to make sure you choose From Data Model, because that'll give us access to the tables that have been tied together. And how about we go ahead and put our first pivot table right here on our worksheet. That'll be nice and convenient. So before we go full tilt in building our pivot tables, let's take a second and acknowledge something. There are a ton of pivot tables that we can build from our list, and I strongly encourage you to build some on your own using the data that we provided. The purpose from here on out is just to show you how to build various pivot tables and to show you some very general concepts. Frankly, I'm not too worried about the end result being overly practical because I feel it's more practical to show you what you can really do here. Let's see if everything works out. For our first pivot table, let's say we want to get a feel for our average sale broken down by home ownership. So I'll cruise over here and I'll expand out our customers table, and you can see all the fields there. And I'll take the home ownership and I'll drag it down here. Let's see what we get. Ah, look at that. We got those that own, rent, and the undisclosed. Pretty cool. And now what I'll do is I'll cruise down here to the orders table. Let's find our sales field, drag it down there. Okay. And we can see that, yes, we do have some sales for our stuff, but that's not quite what we want. We want the average. So how do we change this to the average? So cruise down here, hover over where it says values, click on that, go under value field settings, which is geek speak for I want to change the calculation. So I'll go ahead and choose that. And I'll choose the average. And then I'll click on number format to make it look like currency, make it easy on the eyes. Click OK. And there we go. So we can see the rough numbers that we work with. So roughly people that own account for roughly $62 on average. Those that rent, $64, and the undisclosed, which is roughly 70. Interesting. Okay, so that's pivot table number 1. Let's move on to pivot table number 2. So for our next pivot table, let's say we want to see our sales broken down by income tiers. How do we do that? Well, I'll click right here, and then I'll go back and click on Insert, Pivot Table from Data Model. And it says you want to put it on the existing worksheet. Sounds good. So click OK. And now we'll do a rinse and repeat. So we'll cruise over here to our customers table and drag the tier down here. So we have our high, middle, and low. And for the orders table, let's cruise down here and grab the sales and drag that down here. Okay, so there's our sales. And it doesn't look like our numbers are quite displaying in currency. So I'll cruise down here, click on value field settings, choose number format, click currency, then click OK, and click OK again. And then, by the way, as a side note, I always prefer to choose the formatting down here. The reason being is sometimes if I go up here and use this home tab and currency format up here, sometimes when I refresh the data, the formatting gets stripped away, which isn't cool, kind of gets aggravating. So a little tip for you. Okay, so let's go back here and actually, let's not go back here. That's done for this pivot table. So let's move on. Okay, so for our next pivot table, let's say the boss wants to see the sales by category. Go figure. So let's do another rinse repeat. So I'll click down here at this cell, looks good. And then click on Insert, Pivot Table from Data Model again. Sure, well, we go ahead and put that pivot table right there, Excel. That sounds very nice. And now let's cruise over here. Where is our sales and our category? So that happens to be on our orders table in this case. So I'll take the category, drag it down here, and then we'll drag our sales down here. And again, no currency formatting, go figure. So I'll just choose that one more time. Make you currency. Thank you very much. Click OK, and there we go. All right, fantastic. Now, again, in real life, you can play with the formatting however you wish. Today, I'm kind of feeling a little lazy, so I'm not really worried about overall great aesthetics, so we can deal with that. Okay, so that'll do it for that pivot table. Let's move on and take a look at our next one. Okay, so for our next pivot table, let's click down here, and let's go up and click on Insert, Pivot Table from Data Model. Sure, existing sheet. Sounds wonderful, Excel. And now for this pivot table, let's say that we want to see our sales and expenses for each device sold. Now, there's a reason we're doing that, and I'll show you that here in a little while. But for right now, let's go ahead and take our device field. Where are you? Drag that right down here. Remember, the device is how the person purchased the stuff. Did it come through the PC, phone, tablet, etc., etc.? And then we'll slide down here to the orders. And let's go ahead and take our sales, put that here, and our expenses right there. Okay, looks good. Imagine that, no currency. So, one more time. There we go. Oops. Nope. That one. Yeah. Ugh. Drives me crazy. And let's do that one more time. Okay, there's that. Okay, that's that. All right, now, as I mentioned, there is a definitive reason we're building a pivot table like this, of which you'll see. But for right now, let's go on and take a moment and to build our last pivot table. Okay, so let's click down here, and let's say the boss decided that they want to see our orders over time. Not nice. Anyhow, to do that, let's go up and click on the Insert Pivot Table from Data Model. Of course, we'll put it there. And now let's go over here and take our orders and drag it down here. There we go. And let's take our sales. Where are you? And drag it down here. Okay. Now, in real life, you might wind up graphing this kind of stuff, of which we're going to do. So you may have to finagle it a little bit to get it to display the way you want. But for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cruise down here and I'm going to expand this stuff out so we can kind of see various quarters, of which will become a little more obvious in a few moments. So as a side note, working with dates can get a little quirky and aggravating, so just be prepared for that. Oh, look, the sales isn't displayed in currency. Here we go. Let's do it one more time. Good grief. And if anything, you'll become experts at doing that. Okay. Thank you, Excel. All right. So just to kind of wrap this section up with respects to this pivot table. So we'll be building a few charts here in a couple seconds, but for right now, this pivot table, hopefully it'll cooperate when we go through and build it. So let's see what we get. Okay, so for this next step, what we're going to be doing is building some charts, as I just mentioned. Now, you can kind of do this in any order that you want. Some people prefer to build a pivot table, then build the chart right after that. Some people prefer to build the pivot tables, then build the charts, whatever. I'm simply doing this as a progression. So in real life, you can kind of do the mix and match however you wish. So let's get into building our charts. Okay, so I'm going to scroll up here a little bit and let's go in and start building our first chart. Okay, so to build our chart, first let's click on our top pivot table here. And in this case, it's the sales by the home ownership status. And then we'll cruise up and click on Insert, Pivot Chart again. And which one shall we go with? What can we dazzle our bosses with today? Column? Line? No. Bar? Let's go with the bar chart. So click OK here. All right, we'll move this up here and then we'll kind of resize this a little bit. One thing I don't like is these buttons right here because I kind of find them to be more aggravating than anything. So I tend to remove them. So I'll cruise up here and click on Field Buttons, Hide All, and then we're left with that. Okay, so next thing, if I look at this axis right here, could this work for us or against us? I don't know. It depends on the display. So let me show you the way you can change this if need be, because sometimes this axis can get a little cluttered. So if you do a right click on it and go under Format Axis, if you look right here where it says Major Units and the number 2, if you play around with this, it can make it easier for people to read. So for example, if I change this number to let's say 10, you can kind of see how the scale changes. So is 10 always going to work? No. 5 maybe. All right, let's go with that. So let's say 5 works. Okay, so that'll do it. Hopefully we can impress the bosses with our cool graphics. All right, so that'll do it for chart number 1. Let's move on and talk about chart number 2. Actually, strike that. One thing I forgot to do is change the title of this chart. It's usually a good idea to change the title to make it something practical so when people read it, they understand what they're looking at. So in this case, why don't we just go up there and do a double click, and let's just change this to, let's say, average sales by ownership. Okay, that should be a little more practical. And click OK. All right, so now we can move on to the next chart. All right, let's cruise over here and click on our second pivot table, and let's build another chart for our income tier by sales amount, however you want to interpret that. So let's cruise up here and click on Insert, Pivot Chart again. And let's go ahead and let's just give them a standard column graph. Why not? Okay, let's put that there. And again, we'll do a rinse repeat and we'll get rid of these buttons, hide them. is there anything I really want to do here? Nah, we can go ahead and just leave that as is. One thing I might do is click on this and get rid of it in real life. Don't know. You can kind of change that if you wish. Also, other things you might want to play around with as a sidebar. I'm not going to do it too much today. You can click on this plus sign and go through here and play around with various labels you may want to add or remove. For right now, I'll leave this as is. And while we're at it, why don't we give this chart a name? Let's call this, let's say, sales by income tier. Okay. So what I call it, sales or total sales by income tier. I'd have to test that out to see how it works. For right now, let's just be lazy because I don't really feel like typing and embarrassing myself further. So I'll just go with some sales. Okay. So that'll pretty much do it for this chart. Let's move on to our next one. Okay. So for our third chart, let's go over here and click on our third pivot table and let's add another one. We'll click on insert, pivot chart again. And how about this time we go with the often maligned pie graph? Yes, I can hear you complaining about it from here. And we'll go with this donut graph and we'll click OK. So why are we going with this? Because it looks cool. Anyhow, let's go up here and get rid of our field buttons, hide those. And you know, while I'm thinking of it, I think I'm going to go up here and click on these legends just to delete them. It'll probably make it easier to read because it's kind of implied. And now let's go back here and check out this donut graph. And now usually what people like to do is show the percentage breakdown of these segments just because, I don't know, they like to see it. So to show them, you can hover over it, do a right click, and go under data labels. And it's tempting to go under data callouts. I'm not a big fan of those. So what I'll do is I'll choose add data labels. And then you're expecting to see some percentages, but you actually get the number. So to fix that, you want to right click on those again, and you got to do some precise right clicking. You have to use your Jedi powers on that one. And we'll do a right click, go under format data labels. And then over here on the right-hand side, let's go and check the percentage and uncheck value. There we go. Okay. So now let's go over here and let's move these out here a little bit. So let's move this here, move that there, and put that there. That way the bosses won't complain and whine about how they can't read the numbers. That looks good for now. So let's move on and talk about our next chart. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'll just move these real quick. I'll put that here, put that right here, and put that right here. Why? Because we're eventually going to move these charts onto his dashboard sheet. So I'm not really worried about what it looks like right now. Okay, so let's move on to the next chart. Okay, so for our next chart, let's go over here and click on the fourth pivot table. And in this case, what we're going to do is create a radar graph or a spider graph. Now, I do recognize there's a whole thing behind it. Radar charts can get pretty involved. That's totally cool. That said, just for today, let's pretend we're going to put a radar chart on our dashboard just to add a little pizzazz to it so we can mesmerize the executives when they watch this thing, and we can create the illusion that we actually know what we're doing. Plus, it looks cool as well. So anyhow, how do we do that? Let's go up and click on Insert, Pivot Chart again. And let's go down here to the radar graph. And let's go with this one right here. Click OK. All right, so it's a little condensed. So again, let's get rid of the buttons here first. Goodbye. Now, where do we go from here? Well, the thing that jumps out first is over here on this legend. I don't like where it says sales and sales. Excuse me. I don't like how it says some and some. It's like, okay, it kind of sounds redundant. So a few ways you can do this, but let's go over here and let's change this. So why don't we just change this to something simple like sales? And then we'll click on over here and choose that, make that sales as well. Excuse me, make this expenses. Okay, there we go. All right. Next thing, these numbers here, not a big fan of those. So I'm going to click on those and just press delete. That way, when we start to filter our data and use some slicers, it'll kind of dance around a little bit and create this really cool effect. Again, I'm being obviously sarcastic here, or am I? about why you want to put this chart out here. So take it for what it's worth. Okay, so there is your basic radar graph. And now let's move on and build our last chart. All right, so let's scroll down here and click on our pivot table that contains the dates and the sales. And in this case, what we're going to do is build a line graph. So just so you understand, line graphs are used primarily to show trends over time. That's when you want to use them. So in this case, stands a reason that we want to see our sales over time. So henceforth, let's create the line graph. So to create the line graph, let's cruise up, first click in the pivot table, and then go up and click on Insert, Pivot Charts, go with a line graph, click OK, and we get this. Okay. Of course, my nemesis, the buttons are there, so you got to go. Bye. And let's stretch this out a little bit. Okay. Is that acceptable? Is that good? Yeah. It can work. Again, if I start showing some stuff over here with this pivot table, the chart will change. For right now, that should suffice. So again, you use a line graph to show things or trends over time, and that should be good. Actually, while I think about it, double thought, think about it twice, say it however you wish. I'll click on where it says total and get rid of that. Okay, much better. So now let's scroll up and take a look at our charts. Let's close out this format chart area as well. And we'll close out this pivot table chart field area thingy as well. By the way, if you ever close that out by accident, that often haunts people. They'll close it out and they'll have no idea on how to get it back. If you cruise up and you click on the Pivot Chart Analyze tab where it says Field List, that'll kind of bring it back or take it away depending on what you want to do. Okay, so let's take a look at these charts. All right, they look pretty good. So the next step is going to be formatting them to make it look a little better. So that'll be the next phase. Okay, so you can format these charts wherever you want because they're eventually going to be moved over here onto this dashboard sheet. But for today, seems convenient. So why don't we go ahead and just format our charts? So I'll click on our first chart and then let's go up and click on Design, change colors, go with purple, then choose this one as well. Change that. Just click on the radar graph. Okay. Just click on the donut graph. Change that. While I'm thinking of it, do I want the title to be there? Yes or no? Probably not. So I'll click on that and press delete to get rid of that. And let's scroll down here and click on our line graph. And let's change the colors on that. And I'll get rid of that chart title as well. Okay, that should be all right. So now if I want to get more razzly-dazzly, we obviously have some more chart styles up here we can play with, but I'm not too worried about that for today. Okay, so now we have the charts ready. So the next step is to put our dashboard together. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so to start to put our dashboard together, let's go over here onto the dashboard sheet and let's start to put some things together. Now, what some people tend to do is they select a bunch of cells, merge them, and then put the title right there. I don't like doing that. I'm not a fan of merging cells just because they can haunt you down the road. So for today, I'll do something very PowerPointy and I'll cruise up and click on Insert and let's find a shape. Let's go over here and just draw like a rounded rectangle, say like maybe something like that. And let's just make that purple as well. So I want to go with that shade of purple. Whatever, not going to waste time. And let's give this a title of, let's say, my dashboard. How original. And let's select this font here. Come on, you, let's go. Come on. There, come on. Oh, it's teasing me. Come on now. There we go. And let's see. Does that look good? I guess. I'm not a very aesthetic person, so you can critique me for my lack of design skills all you wish because I will take it. Okay. So next, usually when you work with dashboards, they have a white background. So there's a couple ways you can do this. Method number one is you can cruise up and click on the View tab and uncheck the Grid Lines tab. That'll make your sheet entirely white. Or what you can do is select the entire sheet. And then from the Home tab, you can maybe put a fill color in white up there to kind of make it blank as well. I don't care which one you do. Just for today, I'm kind of feeling like removing the grid lines. Why? I don't know, why not? Okay. So the next step is to move our charts from this pivot table sheet over. Okay, so there are a few ways to move your charts over. In this case, I might show you something a little unorthodox, but seems to work better in the long run. So what I'm going to do is I'll jump back over to the pivot table sheet as I just did. I'll click on the chart, and then I'll go up onto this design tab, and then I'll click on move chart. And let's move that over to our dashboard sheet. Click OK. There you go. Nice. And I'll put that right around here. And now let's do a rinse and repeat for the other charts. So I'll click on this, design, move chart, put that on the dashboard sheet, click OK, put that, say, right here. Again, we'll clean this up here in a couple seconds. So we'll take you, move that over to the dashboard sheet. There we go. One more, two more actually. So I'll take this one, design, move, dashboard. There we go. And last one. So I'll click on this chart, scroll down here a little bit, click on that. And we'll move that. Okay. All right. So the next step is to kind of rearrange our charts to make it look more aesthetics and maybe play around with the borders to make it look a little more easy on the eyes. All right. So for this next part, I'm going to go through this pretty quick. I'm not overly worried about aesthetics. There's no need to waste time watching me arrange this stuff because it'll just go, it'll just drive you crazy. Let's say I take this chart and put that right there. Maybe shrink that down a little bit. I guess that'll work. Maybe right there. Next one, let's take our bar chart, column graph, put that right there. And let's take our radar graph and move that over here a little bit. Maybe shrink it down a little bit. Does that work? Move this over here. Move that over there. Put that right there. Okay, that'll work. And now for our donut graph, let's put that right about there. And for our line graph, let's put that right here. Okay. That'll work. All right. So maybe I'll put this right here. Maybe I'll stretch this out a little. Speak, Dave. Stretch this out a little bit. Okay. So does that work? For the most part. Again, no need to waste time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the border of each of these charts just because it might look a little better. So let's just see what we get. So I'll go up here and I'll click on this chart first, then click on design. Format, shape outline. Let's go with no outline. Click away. Let's see how that looks. I guess. So click on this. Format, shape outline. No outline there. Does that work? You tell me. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. What the heck? Let's just go for it today. We can always come back and change it if we want. So let's try removing this one. And let's see, we remove this one. And let's remove this one. Okay, there we go. All right, so does that work? Maybe. So what I might do from here is potentially change the sheet color, maybe put a background in there to make it look a little more slick. But for right now, we'll be able to get away with that. So I guess I'll take this and maybe move it over a little bit more to create some delineation. Maybe move this chart over a little bit, whatever. Okay. So for all intents and purposes, that'll work. So let's move on to the final phase, which is actually adding in some interactivity to our dashboard. So for this final phase, what we're going to do is add in something called a slicer. So in the event you're unfamiliar with a slicer is really just a glorified filter. That's all it really is. Slicers are pretty cool. They're very, very powerful, and there's a lot you can do with them. So let's cruise up here and let's click on our first chart. And then we'll go under Pivot Chart Analyze, Insert Slicer. And let's just say to start things off, we want to filter our data by our customer source. So click OK, choose that. And we'll move this over here. Now, if we start clicking on these buttons, you'll notice that the data will change to be displayed for the appropriate information. So yeah, one thing that comes out, this axis is a little rough. Probably have to go back and change that in the refinement process, but for today, I'm not going to worry about it. So now we see our slicer is working for one chart. The next thing you want to realize is that by default, these slicers are not connected to all the pivot tables or the pivot charts in your spreadsheet. So what you want to do is hover over it, right click, and look for report connections. And then it'll come back and give you a list of all the pivot tables in your file. So go through here and check these pieces off, click OK. There we go. Now, if I start clicking, we should see some magic happening and stuff is being filtered all across the board. Not too bad. Okay, so let's put a little aesthetics on this thing. So what I'll do is I'll cruise up onto the slicer tab and let's make that, let's say 2 columns. Let's stretch that out a little bit, maybe right around there. Okay, that'll work. Let's resize that. Shall we change the colors today? Yes, we shall. What shall we go with? Something like this? I guess. I'm not very good at design, like I said, so yeah, you tell me. Okay, so that's slicer number 1. And let's go up here and let's go with another slicer. So I'll cruise up and let's click on, click on our chart here. And we'll go with, doesn't really matter what chart we click on, to be honest with you. Insert slicer. And then our customer, not our customer source. We just did that. What am I thinking? Let's go under method. There we go. So add our method in here. Put that over here. And let's resize that a little bit right there, right there. That'll look pretty good. And again, the slicer is not connected by default. So we'll do a right click and report connections. Add in all of our pivot tables. Click OK. And now if we start clicking, we should get our stuff being displayed. Okay. So clear that and we'll clear that. And let's just change the display of this slicer as well. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's go through and add in one more slicer. And I got to admit, I'm a little nervous about how this is going to play out because dates always tend to get a little fickle, but let's carry forward and see what we get. So I'm going to go down here and click on our line graph. And then let's click on Pivot Chart Analyze. And this time, let's go with Insert Timeline. So in case you're unfamiliar with this timeline filter, what it allows you to do is look at or filter your data on a chronological basis. So put another way, if your list contains official dates, meaning month, day, year, or some combination of such, you can kind of filter on a date range, which is pretty cool. So let's go with the order date, click OK. And there we go. Let's move this over here. Maybe resize it a little bit. So right now this graph looks a little funky. So let's kind of scroll over here and see what we get. So if I select this, clear it out. Okay, something weird might be going on there. So again, here's where real life meets training demonstration. So looking at this, I'm a little cautious. So I'd have to play with this in real life. But what I'll do is I'll go back to my pivot tables sheet. And maybe what I'll do is I'll expand these pieces out to see if that cooperates. So that's something we might have to tackle in real life. Not fun. Okay, that works. So something you folks can discuss in the comments below. So for right now, let's go ahead and connect this timeline slicer to the rest of our pieces. Select that stuff right there. Click OK, click OK. Shall we change the color? Oh, why not? Let's just go for it. Let's go with this. How's that look? Ooh, not quite. This? Whatever. Whatever. Let's go with this one. Okay. Again, design's not my forte. So now if I start clicking on my pieces, it seems like we're getting some pretty good results there. So it gets a little more intriguing. And right there, let's select a date range, see what we get. That's interesting. Select this, see what we get. Just clear that. Okay, pivot table once again is not cooperating. So now what we might have to do is go back to the pivot table and expand pieces out again. Again, we have to play around with this in real life, but I'm not too worried about that. But for the most part, that'll pretty much do it for our interactive dashboard. So you can see the good, bad, and the ugly of everything you'd have to deal with. So you got some homework assignments ahead of you. if you wish to pursue this further. But that said, that should be enough to get you through at least building a foundational dashboard. And that'll pretty much do it for this tutorial. So please let me know your thoughts in the comments, whether you got some mileage out of this. Please feel free to share your thoughts. Any suggestions, always welcome here. That said, I want to thank you so very much for sitting through this. I know it's not easy to sit there and watch somebody do show and tell. So I will see you in the next video.